So we are in this Canto 3 of Book 1. And we have seen the first ascent of Ashwapati, ascent which included the widening of his consciousness and to the extent where we see where Sri Aurobindo writes, the island ego joined its continent and the finite self mated with infinity. So what we said was there is a kind of a universalization of his consciousness. The narrow bounds of the mind and the physical and the vital are broken, and he kind of bursts into a higher consciousness or a universal consciousness. And the last line that we did was where Sri Aurobindo writes, "There gleamed the dawn of a spiritual day." So from here, there's a next stage of heightening or the ascent. And so he grew into his larger self. Humanity framed his movements less and less. A greater being saw a greater world. A fearless will for knowledge dared to erase the lines of safety reason draws that bar minds soar. Souls dive into the infinite. Even his first steps broke our small earth bounds and loitered in a vaster, freer air. In hands sustained by a transfiguring might, he caught up lightly like a giant's bow, left slumbering in a sealed and secret cave, the powers that sleep unused in man within. So to resume, take up the lines again. So now we see the impact of this heightening, if I can say. Of course, even the previous lines we have had a description. But Sri Aurobindo here once again is telling us what is happening in his external being. You see, what's something that's interesting, very interesting in Sri Aurobindo is he is not merely describing the ascent of consciousness for its own sake. Perhaps he is not interested just in the widening of consciousness per se. What is important to him is what is its impact, effect, influence on the outer nature of man. See, if we want to change or as he puts it, he wants to transform the outer nature, how does it happen? What is the connection between the outer nature and the ascent into higher consciousness? If they are not related, then it's not interesting for Sri Aurobindo just to have an ascent into the higher consciousness. For him, there must be the descent of the consciousness into the outer nature and modifying, rectifying, purifying the outer nature. That is the validity of the ascent into the higher consciousness. Otherwise, till now the yogis have always done this ascent per se, for its own sake, without having any kind of a reflection on the outer nature. So that's what is interesting. Each time we see an ascent in Sri Aurobindo, he is immediately taking to the description of the outer nature of Ashwapati. So look at this. Humanity framed his movements less and less. A greater being saw a greater world. The very word, you see, humanity framed his movements. So that word framed is interesting because the human consciousness delimits you. And how does it delimit us? As you would describe later on, for example, the lines of safety reason draws. You see, reason, emotion, prejudices, tradition, culture. In the name of all these things, we draw a framework around our abilities and we say, hey, this thou shalt do and this you cannot do beyond. So this is the framing of our capacities, of our thinking pattern. So, but Ashwapati now, because he has taken the leap beyond the mind, this frame is as if broken down and he sees a greater world. A fearless will for knowledge dared to erase the lines of safety. Reason draws that bar mind soar. See, this is a very interesting thing here. A fearless will for knowledge dared to erase the lines of safety. You see, this seems to be one of the ways, and I think this is what science itself does. All the time trying to get greater knowledge. And greater knowledge brings you greater fearlessness. It is always ignorance that keeps you in fear, in the shadow of fear. So here with Ashwapati, he is shooting towards the greater levels of consciousness, makes him fearless, and now is ready to go beyond the lines of safety that our human consciousness draws and delimits, and he soars higher beyond mind. Even his first steps broke our small earth bounds and loitered in a vaster, freer air. In hands sustained by a transfiguring might, he caught up lightly, like a giant's bow, left slumbering in a sealed and secret cave, the powers that sleep unused in man within. You see, he has what's interesting is we see the ascent of consciousness releases within him capacities that were lying in a slumber. And of course, this you have seen, you must have read in Sri Aurobindo, this is exactly what happened. His pranayama, the practice of pranayama, which he used to do for many hours per day. He says one of the things was that pranayama itself not only strengthens your body and gives suppleness and all that, that's the kind of the byproduct, if I can say, but the main thing was the sleeping capacities within Sri Aurobindo woke up as if. And then it says overnight he became a critic of painting. Because as in his biography, we don't see Sri Aurobindo the artist, we see the mother as the artist. But Sri Aurobindo could become an art critic. He says by practicing pranayama. And even his faculty, his capacity to write poetry increased tenfold. And only through the practice of pranayama. So there we get an example that how when you get into higher consciousness, your own dormant faculties wake up. Or not only dormant faculties, as he puts it here, left slumbering in a sealed and secret cave. They are there in the subliminal. We are not aware of them, what I can do, what I cannot. And especially what happens as the mind says, no, you are an artist, you are this, you are that, you cannot do that, the other thing. It always gives you the possibilities of do and don't, can and cannot. So this kind of a delimitation or self-limitation is kind of broken down. So it happens with Sashupati here. And he made of miracle a normal act and turned to a common part of divine works, magnificently natural at this height. Efforts that would shatter the strength of mortal hearts, pursued in a royalty of mighty ease, aims too sublime for nature's daily will. The gifts of the Spirit crowding came to him. They were his life's pattern and his privilege. You see, this is exactly what we have been telling, to repeat in a different way. He made of miracle a normal act. See, that's something interesting. What is this miracle actually? When we say something is a miracle, actually it is something beyond the comprehension of our consciousness. Miracle is something where we do not connect logically the things happening and we say, oh, it is miraculous. You know, if somebody suddenly brings out of the blue a dove or a flower and they say, oh my God, it's a miracle. But the Mother and Sri Aurobindo explain that this is so because we do not see the logical connectivity between the result and the event. So what we do not understand, we say it's a miracle. But for the yogi, it is not a miracle. Because he, through his consciousness, sees the continuity, the logical connection of how things have happened. So in one word, if you have knowledge, things don't remain a miracle. It's ignorance which gives you the sense of a miracle. So for Ashwapati, it now has become a natural. He made of miracle a normal act because his consciousness is so high now. There's nothing called ignorance. He does not miss any links. So for him it's normal act. And turn to a common part of divine works. And then he says, efforts that would shatter the strength of mortal hearts, pursued in a royalty of mighty ease, aims too sublime for nature's divine will, daily will, the gifts of the Spirit crowding came to him. So for him, what would have been very difficult effort that would shatter the strength of mortal hearts became normal for him. So these are, we see from the point of view of yoga, what is difficult, what is dangerous, what should not be done by your reasoning. All these boundaries get shattered because you are gone beyond the consciousness of the mind. So from that level, there is no miracle, and all the efforts that are seemingly very difficult on the mental level, they become very easy at that level because he sees the source of the strength. And then interesting here, a pure perception lent its lucent joy. Now this is what we are describing. What are the gifts? The gifts of the Spirit crowding came to him. And what are they? Number one, a pure perception lent its lucent joy. You see, this perception, the word is pure. It's pure perception because normally our perception is motivated, is connected with desire, connected with some kind of a result orientation. So it is never a kind of a purity of perception. But with Ashwapati now, there is no desire, there is no impurity, there is no motivation. So there is a pure perception. That is one of the gifts he gets. And then its intimate vision waited not to think. Now this is an interesting line. Vision waited not to think. That means it's no more, in fact, I think I discussed this before, that as you ascend beyond the levels of the mind, the faculty of thinking goes away. What comes in is the faculty of vision, of perception, of a global thought, as Sri would put it. It's no more your individual, rational, selfish, ego-centered thinking. Thoughts don't come to you as streaks of your own consciousness. So there is more a vision, a perception, than a thought. So it does not mean that the vision does not include thought. But try to understand, when you have a global understanding, so all that you are thinking of is in the parameters of the global consciousness. So it's no more individual thought. I mean, again, to bring in Sri Aurobindo, as I said, after this nirvanic, after this experience of the silencing of the mind with that Guru Lele, he says his mind stopped thinking. Since then his mind, he never thought. Thoughts never came to him. And yet, he has written all that. I mean, thousands of lines he has written. And then these are immaculate thoughts. But then the difference is, these are not individualized, ego-centered thoughts. These are thoughts arisen out of a vision, of a perception. So there is a thought, but the hue of the thought is no more individual. It is always collective, global, universal, divine in its aura, if I can say. So this is what he is gaining now. A vision waited not to think it. The thought was never not wanted. It enveloped all nature in a single glance. It looked into the very self of things. Deceived no more by form, he saw the soul. You see, these are all faculties, these are all perceptions that he has gained. A beautiful, pure perception, an intimate vision, and then enveloped all nature in a single glance, and then he could look beyond the form into the very soul of things. See, these for us are impossible, but for him they are normal, common part of divine works. So these are some of the faculties or capacities that opened up within him as he went up in his consciousness. Now here there is something, a poem that I would like to refer to from this volume 5, that's on page 134. It's, as I do normally, it's all based on his own personal experience. And here this poem is called The Cosmic Consciousness. You see, this global consciousness, as we said, the perception that comes into him. I have wrapped the wide world in my wider self, and time and space my spirit's seeing are. I am the god and demon, ghost and elf. I am the wind's speed and the blazing star. All nature is the nursling of my care. I am its struggle and the eternal rest. The world's joy thrilling runs through me. I bear the sorrow of millions in my lonely breast. I have learned a close identity with all, yet I am by nothing bound that I become. Carrying in me the universe's call, I mount to my imperishable home. I pass beyond time and life on measureless wings, yet still am one with born and unborn things. Well, it's not that you are getting the entire thing, but some of the features that were described in this cosmic consciousness, we begin to see here. This universality, this identity with nature, this larger perception, and to be able to see beyond the form. Now to get back to this, the text here. In beings it knew what lurked to them unknown. It seized the idea in mind, the wish in heart. It plucked out from grave folds of secrecy the motives that from their own sight men hide. You see, this is the same inner perception. What normally we do not understand, Ashwapati now he could gather. He could understand what people do not normally understand, get the idea behind the mind, the wish in the heart, etc. And then what men hide or out of insincerity or out of ignorance, Ashwapati now had the faculty to read all these thoughts and the wishes. He felt the beating life in other men invade him with their happiness and their grief, their love, their anger, their unspoken hopes, entered in currents or in pouring waves into the immobile ocean of his calm. The same question of what we said, the identity with others, with the universal consciousness. So Ashwapati is able to feel or identify himself with the happiness and the grief, as Sri Aurobindo says in this poem, that the world's joy thrilling runs through me. I bear the sorrow of millions in my lonely breast. I have learned a close identity with all. The same thing here, that he has this close, same identity. And here, there's a beautiful reference which I found. Their unspoken hopes entered in currents or in pouring waves into the immobile ocean of his calm. In the Gita, there is an interesting verse which says, as the waters entered the ocean, filling it, but with its base unshaking, even so do desires enter into him. He, the sage, attains peace, not the one who entertains desires. This is, I think, a very important point to remember. I brought in this Gita purposely, which throws light on this kind of a yogi. Who is the perfect yogi? Not one who is disconnected with life. But as he puts us here, as the waters enter the ocean, filling it, but with its base unshaking, so too the desires enter into the yogi. But he, the sage, attains peace, not the one who entertains desires. So he is not affected by them. That means he is into life. The yogi is not disconnected with day-to-day life. He works, he acts, he interacts. But there is this kind of a detachment, desirelessness, where his base of peace, what we call samatha, is not disturbed. It's a beautiful description of the ocean and the river waters. So it's exactly the same way into the yogi, the desires come in, the influences come in, but he is unaffected, just as the base of the ocean itself, when the rivers enter it. So too it is happening with Ashwapati, that all this is their love, their anger, their unspoken hopes, entered in currents or in pouring waves. But what happens? Into the immobile ocean of his calm. This is the same image of the Gita. Into the immobile ocean of his calm. He heard the inspired sound of his own thoughts, re-echoed in the vault of other minds. The world's thought streams travelled into his ken. His inner self grew near to others' selves and bore a kinship's weight, a common tie, yet stood untouched, king of itself alone. The same thing. All these things are happening. The thought streams of the world come into him, and as others what they are thinking, the kinship, everything, but he stood untouched. That is proper yoga. Being untouched, unmoved, and unshaken, and yet to allow the waves to come upon you, because otherwise you are cutting off from the world. Well, here I'd like to take a little diversion. Because this aspect of Ashwapati I tried to get a little deeper and see how does it reflect Sri Aurobindo's own yoga. As I have always questioned that these descriptions that we are getting in Ashwapati, are they really connected to Sri Aurobindo, and can we find any references to Sri Aurobindo's own life? Well, I had the intuition to take up this record of yoga. And record of yoga in volume 1, you must be all having this copy. You see, the publisher's note says, record of yoga is a diary of Sri Aurobindo's yoga between 1909 and 1927. He kept it fairly regularly from 1912 to 1920 and also wrote a few entries in 1909, 1911 and 1927. At different times he gave this diary different names. A record of yoga was the most typical, and the editors have used it as a general title of the work. See the very first line, that this is the diary that was kept between 1909 and 1927. How many years is it? $18 years. Am I right? And does the 18 ring a bell in your mind? Ashwapati's yoga. Ashwapati did yoga for 18 years, according to the Mahabharata. And our Ashwapati did the same thing for 18 years. Sri Aurobindo's record of yoga is from 1909 to 1927. More intensely from 1912 to 1920. But here we have entries almost from 1909, from 1927. And 1909, what happens? He starts this in the month of, the first entries are in the month of June, 17th to 25th of June. And just a month and a half before, he had come out of the jail, of Alipur jail. And you know what happened in Alipur jail? It is Swami Vivekananda who had told him, go this far, this way, that way. And of course, Sri Aurobindo doesn't mention what he said exactly. Maybe this is what he said, but words are for the human beings, for the yogis, they understand the vibration and the message. So there was a kind of a message that was given by Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna both in the jail. And within a month and a half, he goes to Bangladesh. When this first note of June 1909 was written in Bangladesh, because he had gone there to attend a conference, he had gone, not a conference, to give a talk. So in his own little personal diary, a notebook which he was carrying all the time, he notes down the first details of his yoga. So if you can link it with the jail period, which was just a month and a half before, so now Sri Aurobindo begins the Ashwapati's tapasya, and which lasts exactly up to October of 1927, 18 years to the date, to the years. So we have again a very same replica of the Ashwapati of Mahabharata and Ashwapati of Savitri and Sri Aurobindo's own yoga. So it's very interesting. And then 1927, what happened in 1926? The Siddhi day, the overmental. So once he attains the overmental, slowly this tapasya is gone. Then he enters the stage of supermind. So after 1926, when he grows beyond the overmind, there was no more needed to do this tapasya and this yoga. Now he was in connection with the supramental consciousness. And 1927, what happens again? It's the mother who takes over, so-called, because Sri Aurobindo withdraws and says, puts the mother in front. And what happens with Ashwapati after 18 years? The same thing. The Divine Mother says, I will come down and be born to a Savitri. So now the Shakti aspect comes in front. And a tremendous parallelism is there between what we see in Mahabharata and Sri Aurobindo's own life. That now the mother is put in front. Up until now she was behind. So when the supramental Shakti started acting, and that stage came, the really Savitri, the Divine Mother, came in and started taking care of the ashram. The ashram was created, etc., etc. The rest is history. And then we see one important thing that, another thing that I discovered here was, if you have time ever, you can see a few pages, not that we understand much of it. It's all Greek and Latin to us, because the experience is too much beyond our own capacities and our own ken of understanding. But a few things come up very, very clearly. What is Sri Aurobindo doing now in this 18 years of tapasya? If you see this, later on in a note somewhere he writes, he says, what he has done is, first thing is the purification. And this is a point that we miss in our integral yoga, or not miss, but we misunderstand. We have never given it a proper place. Because we have always emphasized so much on surrender that we have almost consciously or unconsciously overlooked this aspect of purification. And this tapasya that Sri Aurobindo does and Ashwapati did were the tapasya of purification. He says, until and unless there is a purification, you cannot move on to the next step. In fact, if you see, of course, some of you might have read this and you know, the Sri Aurobindo speaks of the Sapta Chatushtaya, or the 7 quartets here. Those were the steps that he did for self-purification and for the transformation of the outer nature. Remember 1926, and he was parallelly doing the consciousness, the ascent of consciousness into the overmind, but at the same time he was practicing the purification of the outer being. They went hand in hand. You cannot have this higher consciousness until you purify. That's why in the 7th Chatushtaya, first thing is Shuddhi. Shuddhi is purification. Then comes Mukti, liberation. Then comes Bhukti, the enjoyment. Then comes Siddhi, the achievement, the attainment. So the first thing is the Shuddhi. In all Indian tradition, in all Indian yogas, and so did Sri Aurobindo, follow in his own life the aspect of self-purification. And these 18 years were a tapasya of this self-purification, self-conquest of the outer nature. And there is an entry here, and I just randomly picked it up because it happened to be May 1913, 100 years back, what Sri Aurobindo himself did, and we are in May 2013. Just to remind ourselves what he did, a little extract from this is from page 243 of volume 1 of Record of Yoga. In the physical Siddhi, Ananda is the most advanced. The Vishayanandas of the senses are all perfected in type, seldom contradicted, but as yet insufficient in intensity, except in the taste, where even it is uneven. Now you see, the higher mental Anandas are all present, Prema, Chidghana, Shuddha, but as yet imperfectly active. Ahetuka Ananda is constant in Shanti, but not yet in active Santosha. I know there are some words which you may not understand, but just see what is doing with himself. The Sahaituka Sharira Anandas are established and growing. The Ahaituka manifest but infrequent. Ahaituka Kamananda is alone well established and awakes whenever recalled, but is still too much a matter of the will and not a self-acting dharma of the body. It can manifest now in any state, Jagrat or Samadhishta. Thirst has almost disappeared, though it made an appearance for 2 or 3 days, mostly in a suppressed form, but does not now occur even in the unusual heat of the summer. Hunger makes its appearance fitfully and is never intense and seldom prolonged. It is being rapidly replaced by hungerless Bhojananda. No food, and yet Bhoja is the food into eating. So he says the hunger has gone, yes, your thirst has gone, they are just seldom, sometimes they come. Heat and cold are still slightly effective on the body. Imagine 100 years back, and what was he? In 1914, 1913, what was his age? 13 plus 72, 27. It's almost just 40 years. But he had achieved all this. Heat and cold are still slightly effective on the body. Pain has turned into some form of ananda, except in some extreme touches. Example, burning by fire, blows touching the bone, etc. But here it is only the immediate contact that is painful. The after effect is always anandamaya. In some touches, example, mosquito bite, the habit of discomfort still continues, but it is now occasional and not a dharma of the body. Pain of events is the one asamatha of mind still persisting, and then only as asamatha of failure. This too is occasional, largely artificial, and no longer a dharma of the mind. I just read out a few things, but here is this samatha. This is the very first Chatushtaya as the equality in describing the seven steps, Samatha is the first one, the Gita speaks of attaining samatha. The basis of internal peace is samatha, the capacity of receiving with a calm and equal mind all the attacks and appearances of outward things, whether pleasant or unpleasant, ill fortune and good fortune, pleasure and pain, honor and ill repute, praise and blame, friendship and enmity, sinner and saint, or physically heat and cold, etc. This samatha he had already attained. And very consciously, as you see, is a diary note. He's not just writing poetry. He's just writing down the experiments and the results of their experiments on himself. So, he was already a Gita yogin when he was 40. He had attained absolute samatha. Of course, there are other things are there. There's a passive samatha, there's an active samatha, etc., which you can read for yourself. But what is amazing is the Ashwapati Sri Aurobindo practicing the step of self-purification. And he practiced this for 18 years until he attained an absolute mastery over himself and what we say, the attachments, desires, equality, praise and all that. Nothing mattered to him. So he had gained all that, and then there is one more. I think I have read this 7. Yeah, let me tell you the 7 samatas or the 7 steps. Samata Chatushtaya, Samata, Shanti, Sukha and Hasya. Well, I wanted to read out the Hasya. The laughter, the enjoyment. Even that is part of the Samatha. You are not supposed to be all the time pulling a very serious face and not talking and say, "Thou shalt not talk to me." And this humor, which is part of this Sapta Chatushtaya, and we see coming out so much with Nirodharan. So Nirodharan thing is not just offhand thing that Sri Aurobindo was really referring to. It is part of his own sadhana. So we see this beautiful humor being explained, experienced, expressed with Nirodharan. So we have Hasya, Sukha, Shanti, Samatha. That's the first one. He calls it Sapta Chatushtaya because in each attainment there are 4 classifications. So Samatha, Shanti, Sukha and Hasya. Second Chatushtaya called the Shakti Chatushtaya, Virya, Shakti, Chandibhava and Shraddha. The third one called the Vijnana Chatushtaya, Jnana, Trikaladishti, Ashtasiddhi, Samadhi. Fourth Chatushtaya, Sharira Chatushtaya, Arogya, Uttapana, Saundarya, Ananda. Fifth one, Karma Chatushtaya, Krishna, Kali, Karma, Kama. Brahma Chatushtaya, Sarvam Brahma, Anantam Brahma, Jnanam Brahma, Anandam Brahma. Seventh Chatushtaya, Yoga Chatushtaya, Shuddhi, Mukti, Bhukti, Siddhi. Well, I know these are all Sanskrit terms, may have gone over your head, but purposely I am not touching on that because we will not be reading Savitri but reading record of yoga, and my intention is not that. But just to bring to your understanding that we should not go by this illusion, if I can say, "Oh, Sri Aurobindo," normally that was Nirodharan's argument. "Oh, Sri Aurobindo, you are the avatar, you are the born yogi, so it's okay for you." But friends, it's not okay for you. 18 years of tapasya he did, consciously. He wrote down every experience of that. And then he says, it's only after this that you can really go to the next step. And here there is a very beautiful essay called Yogic Sadhan. This is in volume 2 of the same record of yoga. That's on page 1371. This is an essay which all of you should read. It's called Yogic Sadhan, or Yogic Sadhana, or Yogic Sadhan, edited by the Uttara Yogi. As all of you know, Sri Aurobindo was known as Uttara Yogi, the yogi from the north. So he did not write his name, and printed in Srirangam city in 1911. So imagine this, one of the oldest books you have. But the most interesting thing is, Sri Aurobindo does not lend his name here. He writes only an editorial. Because he says, I have not written that. There was a spirit that came into him which wrote this book. So he says, I will not claim authorship. He has lent his hand to that spirit and personality to write this book. So he says, for those, you may all read it, and you may take up what helps you from it, but it's not I, Sri Aurobindo, who has written that. But for me, it's not a normal spirit that can come and use Sri Aurobindo's hand. Sri Aurobindo will not lend his hands to any Tom, Dick and Harry. So that is the value I have for this book, that whoever might have been the spirit, obviously is of a great yogi. Because just I'll read out one paragraph, and you'll see this is one of the clearest essays in Sri Aurobindo's yoga. Oftentimes I refer to this essay to get the clarity of ideas. What is dejection? What is renunciation? What is desire? What is detachment? I mean, it's so beautifully explained in a common language without the jargon of integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo. It is almost applicable on a universal level. It's just that Sri Aurobindo does not put his signature, otherwise it's an extraordinary essay. Please read it if you can get time. I'll read out only the first few lines to give you the idea of what Sri Aurobindo did himself. The proper course of the sadhana, of the sadhan, normally we call it sadhana. In North India we say sadhan, but sadhana. The proper course of the sadhan is just the opposite of the thing most people do and you have also done. And the Spirit is telling Sri Aurobindo. People begin with the body and prana, go on to the chitta and the manas, and finish up with the buddhi and the will. This is normally we start doing pranayama and this thing, taking care of the body, and then we meditate for the kind of the chitta shuddhi and then the manas, and then we go higher. But he says the real course is to start with the will and finish with the body. That's interesting. He says, no, don't start with the body. This is a wrong approach. Everybody thinks that we must have the body purification. You have the pranayama and this and that, beautiful body figure, and then meditation. You do the asanas. That's the wrong approach. There's no need of asana, pranayama, kumbhaka, chitta shuddhi, or anything else, or anything else preparatory or preliminary if it starts with the will. That was what Sri Ramakrishna came to show so far as yoga is concerned. Do the Shakti Upasana first. He said, who? Sri Ramakrishna. Do the Shakti Upasana. Shakti means Shakti Upasana, you invoke this Shakti, the Divine Mother. Do the Shakti Upasana first, he said. Get Shakti and she will give you Sat. Sat is this, existence, the consciousness. And will and Shakti are the first means necessary to the yogin. That was why he said always, remember, you are Brahman. And he gave that as a central message to Swami Vivekananda. You are Ishvara. If you choose, you can be Shuddha, Siddha, and everything else. Or if you choose, you can be just the opposite. The first necessity is to believe in yourself, the second in God, and the third to believe in Kali. For these things make up the world. Educate the will first. Through the will, educate the jnanam. Through the jnanam, purify the chitta, control the prana, and calm the manas. Through all these instruments, immortalize the body. That is the real yoga. The Mahapantha, that is the true and only Tantra. The Vedanta starts with Buddhi, the Tantra with Shakti. Well, leave alone important ideas, but get the central message. And first he says, whoever the Spirit is, he says the real course is to start with the will, W capital, and finish with the body. And Ramakrishna said, first do the Shakti Upasana, get Shakti and she will give you Sat. Translated into Sri Aurobindo, what do we have? Start with the consciousness, the change of consciousness. Then your mind will be quietened. Once you have the mind and the will, you have the knowledge. From the knowledge, descend into the body and the vital. Because if we start from the vital and the physical, in fact, that's what they would say. You must have surely understood why they insist so much on the psychic contact. You see, instead of doing all these peripheral things of the yoga of the physical, yoga of the vital, yoga of the mental, because when you're doing all this, who is your leader? Who is your guide? Is it your ego? Your desires? Your preconceived notions? Your prejudices? So we don't have a guide. We are going on a journey without a guide. It's exactly what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. First, get your psychic being, the consciousness, the Shakti, the power, the guide. And then he will guide that. The psychic being will guide you in your vital, your physical, whatever you want to do. So now Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Aurobindo come close here, where he says, do the Shakti Upasana, and Shakti will give you the Sat. The existence, Sat is the existence. So it's the Shakti. Now Sri Aurobindo said the same thing. Surrender to her, she will take care of the rest of the transformation. Whereas we, out of our own egocentricity, we'll think, oh, I will do the sadhana of the physical, and then people want to do the transformation of the physical cells already. There is a lot of talk about transforming the physical cells, immortalizing the physical cells. Do you know the meaning of your psychic being? So it's very clear, Sri Aurobindo, Sri Ramakrishna, and whoever this person is, they're telling us, first change your consciousness. Or in Sri Aurobindo's parlance, first contact the psychic being. And that's exactly what we see in Savitri, in Ashwapati. He has started with the journey toward the soul. You see, we do not get any other description of his pranayama and all that. But I would like you to think over, because this is a question that has always evaded me. Was it that Sri Aurobindo did all his pranayama as a purification parallelly with the psychic, or a journey towards the psychic? Or is it that he had already, while being in Baroda, already started somewhere, got the connection with the psychic being, and was pulling the psychic into the physical? Or was it with him always a parallel movement? There was an ascent and a descent, and an ascent and a descent constantly happening. It is not one way goes up and then says, now stop, I'll come back, and then again goes up. It is not like that. Because this journey that I am seeing here for this 18 years of record of yoga ends in 1926. I mean, the record is 27, but the experience is 1926. And then there's the descent of the mother. Descent in the other sense, not the physical sense. Mother takes over, and with Ashwapati, there's the descent of the Supreme Mother as Savitri. So there's obviously a rhythm there. So with Sri Aurobindo, the outer and the inner were parallel. It was not ascent and descent. Ascent and descent went together. So it is that is fascinating, and that's what I discovered when I see this Ashwapati's opening up of the faculties, change of the outer. Because we have seen already how the consciousness has gone to the universal, and it opens up the faculties within, faculties which are dormant, which he himself did not know for a while. So that is what is how I'm trying to put together Sri Aurobindo's record of yoga, what's happening to Ashwapati. So I would like to take up the reading once again from our text here. And so we were at this line, into the immobile. Their love, their anger, their unspoken hopes entered in currents or in pouring waves into the immobile ocean of his calm. I took off from this immobile ocean. That is called the samatha. The samatha was attained by Ashwapati, was attained by Sri Aurobindo, and that was the highest message of the Gita. A Gita yogin was one who had attained the samatha. So when Sri Aurobindo says in one of his letters that it is Sri Krishna's yoga that is being practiced here in the ashram, no wonder. Because he had become the perfect Gita yogin first. No wonder that you have to be a Gita yogin first before you can become a Sri Aurobindo yogin. Because all these questions of samatha, etc., they're given in the Gita. So no wonder now we see the connection between Sri Aurobindo and Sri Krishna are inevitable. Because if you want to do Sri Aurobindo's yoga, you have got to do Gita's yoga first. And therefore in 1926 Sri Krishna comes and merges himself in the physical of the Sri Krishna and Sri Aurobindo, and then Sri Aurobindo is now free. Now he has attained, mastered the Gita Yoga, he moves on. So whole of this is nothing, if not nothing, but more or less the perfection of the Gita Yoga as practiced, experienced by Sri Aurobindo in his own consciousness and in his outer being, please remember. So to conclude, we have the famous trilogy in the Mother, aspiration, rejection and surrender. Aspiration is just the spark plug. When you start an engine, the key, the spark, where the motor starts is the aspiration. Then immediately after this aspiration, we leap over to surrender, because we have been told surrender is the beginning, the middle, the end, all that's fine. But in the synthesis of yoga, he makes it very clear, and again we have got his own experience, that without purification, surrender cannot be done. It becomes more or less a lip service. Mother has surrendered to thee my thoughts and my life and the emotions and my actions. It's all a lip service. Because are we really sincere? And this sincerity, this prayer can be uttered by somebody who has got a Shuddhi. That's why in our Indian yogas always there's a question of purification. In one of my talks in the West, I don't know where, people used to say, well, we would like to meditate. So I said, sit down for meditation, I do this and I do that. Then I said, how much of purification do you do before meditation? You live the normal life of your desires of this and that and everything, and then just at 5:30 now it's time, sit down for meditation. How do you think the thoughts will be controlled? You say, no, I am not able to achieve the control of the thoughts, or control of the mind, the quietness of the being. But have you prepared yourself for that? Or are you preparing simultaneously? So that's what in this message we see. First there is this question of the consciousness, the purification. Then only comes after Shuddhi comes the Mukti. Mukti is liberation from the lower nature. So Mukti will not come first. Shuddhi has to be done. If not first, at least parallelly first. So in proportion to the Shuddhi, you can have the Mukti. In proportion to the Mukti, you will have the Bhukti. Bhukti is the enjoyment. Enjoyment not of the vital sense. Enjoyment of the divine rasa. That you will see beauty, you will see joy, you will have ananda, you have the delight of existence in everything there. So, first we have the Shuddhi, where we have no relations, where we have no connections, where we have no desires, where we have no passions. But on the third level, all these events come back, but in their purified form. You will have the relations, you will have friends, you will have work, you have responsibility, you have everything. But then the difference is, you are no more the worker. You are only an instrument. And some of these writings are extraordinary. Sri Aurobindo writes there, I don't remember, I wish I could. He says, even my own body, my work, my actions are a point of reflection of Shakti's work in this world. So I am no more the me, the myself. All my actions become a reflection of that Shakti. So that is the real bhukti, the real enjoyment. So where you are enjoying through the divine consciousness. So what the mother and Sri Aurobindo, we have seen her laugh, we have seen her play, we have seen her exchange things, we have seen her telling things to people. And by the way, I'm just remembering and to invite you, the 12th and 13th of August, I'm telling you much in advance so you can prepare your calendar. We are having a special program at Sakar, and some of you will be invited. The first session is I've Seen the Mother. On the 29th of March, we had a beautiful session, some of you were there, where the people, having seen the mother, having been with the mother, they told us what she was. I mean, she was almost more human than a human mother. And yet, there was no attachment. There's no passion. Absolute detachment. So it's a very beautiful understanding of what Sri Aurobindo is writing here. You enjoy the attachment from a non-attachment. I think T.S. Eliot, the Wasteland, the way to possession is by disposition. The way to enjoyment is by disenjoyment, non-enjoyment. He catches the Indian Gita sense. So here we see the perfect thing, and we see in the life of the mother that how she advised each one, and each one felt so loving, so cared, so personal, and yet she was impersonal. She had no partiality to anybody. So then we realize that being impersonal and impartial, you can be the most loving one. It's no more my child and my daughter and my husband and my... When you take out the my, the intensity of love and relation becomes 100-fold more. Well, coming back to the invitation, on 12th of August, we are going to have a program called I Have Seen the Mother. We are inviting some people from the ashram who had come very early in the 1950s and 40s and 50s to speak to us about their conversation, their contact with the mother. And on the 13th of August, we are going to have again a program called My Contact with the Mother. So those who are not physically seen her, and yet there is a next generation which is coming up who have yet a beautiful contact with the mother. So we have enlisted a few names from Auroville also. We'll soon be sending you emails inviting you to speak. So these are 2 days when I want to really get this person who is that impersonal person, how did she deal on the human level? I mean, that was most magnificent, By the way, you can see the YouTube. I put my entire 29th of March on my YouTube. You just go to Ananda Reddy YouTube and you'll have my list there. And you click on the 29th of March. You can hear this entire program for about 2 hours, the 4 main speakers. And you will see one speaker, I'll never stop admiring her. I mean, she was very, matter of fact. No airs, no big talks. But Deepshika was holding the mic in front of her mouth. She was just answering to questions. But there you could see, if you want to really see a person living in the psychic being. I mean, I really class her as one of these human examples of somebody living constantly in the psychic consciousness. I mean, her purity, her joy, her surrender, her faith, her trust, extraordinary. She didn't give a talk, it's just question answers. You have seen, both of you, maybe Linda was there. The purity, you can see, there's no ego there. So that will be a lovely example for you to see. We are talking about the mother and Sri Aurobindo, but on a human level, you have still beautiful examples in the ashram. And please see the last lady in the forum there, and you must watch that. So, and I'm inspired to tell you all that because that day it was really a great day for many of us, and one or two wrote beautiful letters to Manoj Das Gupta saying such an extraordinary program it was, and I wish you have many more like this. Because it's so beautiful to connect with the mother on the personal level. Sometimes we read Savitri, the mother, the life divine. But there is a mother who is tangible there. And what all these people have spoken are not published in any volumes. Maybe they'll never be published. And yet we get such gems of things, what the mother did, how she cared, an extraordinary being. So now I'll just read a couple of lines, I don't have much time. But, I can't speak of Savitri without connecting to Sri Aurobindo's life. I mean, for me it's a mirror image, Savitri and Sri Aurobindo's life. So I always see them together. Without the mirror image of Sri Aurobindo's life and mother's life, Savitri is only a piece of literature. But for me, it's a mirror image of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So I had taken off from this into the immobile ocean of his calm. He heard the inspired sound of his own thoughts, re-echoed in the vault of the other minds. The world's thought streams travelled into his ken. His inner self grew near to other selves and bore a kinship's weight, a common tie, yet stood untouched, king of itself alone. I think we had done that, so the most important thing was, yet stood untouched, king of itself alone. So this is the yogi par excellence, who is beyond and at the same time within. He is not a sannyasin who is beyond action. That's the difference between a sannyasin and a yogi. Sannyasin leaves the world. He is beyond the world. But a yogi is within, inside, part of the world. And yet, as it is commonly said, like a drop of water on a lotus leaf, untouched. He is there on the lotus leaf, but the lotus leaf is not wet. So this, I think we can halt there, because from there we can take up a different explanation. Yeah, I think it's pretty full. Let's concentrate a bit.